Hello, everybody, to part 2 of our amazing, or our interview with the amazing Daniel Gutierrez. Did I say that correctly?
Sure did.
And we had a first part. If you haven't watched that yet, please do that first to learn about Daniel's journey. And we would just ended that on a very sensitive point. I asked him a question about his transition to a whole new way of looking at life and success. And he said that it was indeed a moment. So I'm dying to know, what was that moment?
So
Over to you, Daniel.
And this is how I opened my book. So I always tell people, I'm going to take you on a little story, just kind of imagine this. I am in New York City, sometime in November-ish, December. It's a winter day. I'm on Fifth Avenue, which is a very prestigious road in Manhattan, or street. I'm about 35 floors up at a very posh membership-only restaurant. And I'm sitting in a big leather chair. I'm wearing my $1,700 suit. I'm drinking a $250 shot of cognac. I've got a cigar in my mouth. And I'm looking out the window. Scenes I think I can ever remember. And there's big old snowflakes falling like toilet paper size. I mean, it's beautiful. And it's just like the most picturesque moment in my life. And I'm looking out there and I can see the reflection of myself in the glass. And then out of nowhere, as I'm sitting there full of myself, to the left of me, I have a very prominent national politician. And to the right of me, I have an athlete. I'm thinking I have arrived. This is what I've worked my life for. And then in just like within the same second, I hear a voice. And the voice says to me, "And what values did you sell to get where you're at?" And I was like, what? Where did that come from? And again, I heard the voice. What values did you sell to get where you're at? Immediately after that, tears started to roll down my face, and I realized I was lost. I realized in that moment that what I had defined as success, and by the way, it was successful. For most people would love to have been in that position. But something in me took me back to when I was 17. At the age of 17, I was a licensed Baptist minister. And I was already teaching and on radio, and I was going and studying Bible and all this stuff. And that was a path that I went on as a young man. But what I was being questioned about was that voice was saying, what happened to that boy? What happened to those values? And who are you? And that changed my entire life. That moment changed my entire life. And that moment, I did change everything, because I walked away from everything. I was a very high paid speaker in corporate America, making upward of $25,000 an hour. It was, I didn't have any reason to leave, but I did. And I spent the next 4, 5, 6 years traveling around the world, working with Buddhist monks and the shamans of the Amazon and the shamans of the Andes, asking questions about life. What was life really all about? And that's the beginning of the book. That's where I start my trip to radical mindfulness. I mean, I didn't know it was radical at the time. I was just following my instinct, which, by the way, most people would not do. They would not walk away from that. But I will say today that most leaders, I'm not going to say any leader, but most leaders have to make decisions that are against their own values sometimes if they want to keep their position. And it's unfortunate, but that's part of leadership, is deciding where you're going to play and how you're going to play. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily align with your values. So I understand how difficult that is, because I surely played the same game. I just would turn a blind eye and say, I don't want to hear about it. So that's the interesting beginning of my journey that eventually got me to the title of the book, which is Radical Mindfulness. Excuse me.
So with that, by the way, welcome to Permission to Come Alive. These are our weekly transmissions where Dina, Marais, and I come together and just chat in a really casual, authentic way about whatever we feel that we want to talk about on the topic of coming alive. And Daniel Gutierrez is our first guest on this series of transmissions. And he is many things. We'll call you a spiritual medicine man with a history of Wall Street, boardrooms, corporate speakers, Fortune 500, sales training coach, teaching people how to be successful, author of several books and soon to be released his newest book called Radical Mindfulness that I'm so excited to be editing and working with you. And so what brought you to the decision to actually write this book?
Well, so if you can imagine, I'm on this journey, traveling around the world, looking for answers, my truth, seeking my truth. And then waking up one day and going, why? Why did I do that? Why did I give up my career? Why did I give up my leadership position? Why did I give up my national position? I mean, I was really a little mad because I was like, why did I do all that? And then one day, I got a phone call from my sister. It said, Daniel, you need to come home. My mother had been sick for about 1.5 years at that point. And her sickness had taken a wrong turn. And I was asked to come home. So I knew it was serious. So everything that I did was preparing me for what would happen next. And I'm not going to tell the whole story because that's in the book, but I'm going to tell you a little bit of it. And so I go home to visit my mother. And my siblings had been watching her and taking care of her because they all lived close to her. I was the only one that lived in California. So I said, why don't you guys go home and let me care for her tonight? I'll stay at the hospital with her. And I remember it being about 2:00 in the morning. And it's cold because that's the way hospitals are, I guess, for germs. And she's got all these machines on, so I couldn't sleep because every time one beeped, I thought, oh my gosh, she's still here. About 2:30 in the morning, something really amazing happened to me. And I'm going to abbreviate the story because I want you to read about it. But I was looking at my mother, and my ego mind wanted to get caught up in my feelings and my emotions about poor me, I'm losing my mother. And the other side wanted to say, you were a horrible son. You lived in California. You never came and saw your mom enough. I mean, all that was going on in my mind all at one time, which I think is very humanistic. But then I remembered my training to get centered, to get present. And I got really, really present. And before I knew it, it was weird. It was like all of a sudden I could feel my mother's organs in my own. And I could feel her heart failing, and I could feel her liver in my own body. And I could feel the struggle of her lungs. And I could feel, it was just like, what's happening to me? And why am I feeling this? And in the beginning, I was scared because I've never experienced this before. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, I see a light in front of me. And that light was no longer my mother. It was just a light. It was just a soul. It was just a spirit. And then I became a light, and I wasn't Daniel and she wasn't mom. It was just two lights speaking to each other. And she says to me, before we ever incarnated into this lifetime, you made a promise to me. Your promise was that you would be here when I needed you most, and you're here. You have fulfilled your contract. You are free to go. And I just remember just going, what? Tears are rolling down my face, and I'm going, what a gift. What a gift to feel that and experience that. That's when the word came to me that was radical. Because radical mindfulness is just not mindfulness or awareness. It's the practice of mindfulness. Had I not had a practice, I would have gotten stuck in guilt. I would have gotten stuck in all these other things that are common to the human experience. But I would have never experienced that beautiful moment with my mother that said, all is well and all is good, son. She's all the last thing that interaction was about was live your life. So the book, the question was, how did this book come about? Well, I had a contract for another book called Dancing in the Chaos. But the book was being written from my intellect. It was being written to make money. And I went back to my agent and I fired him. And I said, I no longer want to write that book anymore. I'm going to write a book about my mom. I want to write a book that's from the heart. I want to write a book that honors her and the experience I had with her. And that's what I did. And that's where the book came from. And that's where Radical Mindfulness came from that moment when I said, that's pretty radical that I could see that and experience that. And I've told that story quite a few times, and people come to me and they say, oh, I had a similar experience with my mom or with my dad or whatever. And it's a beautiful thing to be that present, to get that gift. So that her death was bittersweet because I knew everything was okay, and the human side of me needed to experience grieving. So the book talks about that in, I think, chapter 2 or chapter 3. And then I go on to continue to tell stories of what I learned in that short time that I had with my mother. So that's where it came from.
Oh.
Did I answer your question?
Absolutely amazing. It's very emotional. Can I ask you, Daniel, so then in the book, do you then describe to people reading it some practices that they can do to actually really experience this kind of being present?
Yeah, well, the book has, I think, 5 practices, what I call practices, right? Like, I'll tell you one really quick. I don't know how much time I have, but I'll tell you the first one. The first one is connecting to essence, right? And then connecting to you, and then connecting to others. And I learned that from a shaman high up in the mountains above Ollantaytambo, Peru. And I was with the shaman, and he was like 4 foot nothing. His name was Freddie, which I was very disappointed. Like, what, I thought you would have like a very, like, you know, name I couldn't pronounce. You can't be Freddie. You're not a frog. He says, no, I'm not. Anyway, so I got over Freddie, and that was his name. Maybe that's his given name. And I was watching him. We were on the top of this beautiful mountain, about 13,000 feet, looking over the Andes, and he was like a gaze at the sky. And I said, Freddie, and I actually recorded this. It's on my YouTube channel. I recorded it in Spanish, and I interpreted it while I was recording. And I said, what's the meaning of life? How do we find true peace and tranquility? And he's got this booming voice, and he's not 5 foot nothing, right? He's got this booming voice, and he says, we must connect to the Creator first, which I call essence in the book. Mm. Then we connect to ourselves. And then we connect to others. And then he looks at me and he says, Daniel, there is no other way. And that's one of the practices that I talk about, that even though I go into giving you steps or whatever we call them, I'm not sure what we ended up, but to help you get centered in the moment, to help you get radically mindful, without understanding the practices that I had to find forgiveness. I had to find unconditional acceptance. But my mother was teaching me in those just few minutes, the few hours that I had with her. She was teaching me these things through her. I mean, she was in pain. She was dying. But there was still those lessons there that I was picking up and going, because I always thought my mother didn't know me. I never told her what I did. But in the end, she showed to prove that she knew all along who I was. It was just a beautiful thing. So we have practices in there, and we have ways to get radically mindful. And they're very important. I have my clients nowadays practice these ways of getting radically mindful to help them stay focused. Because the whole goal here is that nothing outside the present moment, nothing outside of now is important. And we create our future in the moment. And if we bring the past into the present, then we're recreating the very thing that we fear. So how do we find power in the moment, in being radically mindful and practicing what we know? I spoke at an ashram the other day, and I said to them, I said, what can I teach you about meditation? You're masters. I'm in an ashram. What can I teach you about yoga? I'm in an ashram. You're masters. But I have one question. And they all looked at me like very intently. I said, right down this driveway is a very busy road. Right, you know, the magic ends of the ashram, and then it's life. If you pull out and someone pulls out and almost hits you, what's your first reaction? Is it to yell at them? Is it to what? I said, if it's not peace and tranquility, then your practice doesn't mean anything. And they all just looked at me and went, wow. I said, that's radical. That's radical mindfulness. So everyone can learn, even though I think the book is designed for people who are new to understand peace and tranquility, but it's also lessons to remind those who are on a spiritual path that we're not supposed to just do this when we're doing yoga or when we're doing meditation. This is a practice for all day long, all the time.
Wow.
That's the challenge.
That's amazing. Yes, and I think that is the challenge because we get so easily distracted.
Absolutely.
And taking us off our game, you know, even though we have the best intentions of the day to really stay mindful.
Right.
And something inevitably happens that pulls us off. So it's to tune back in and to have that discipline because the payoff is so amazing, isn't it, Daniel?
Yes. Well,